I'm going to get, whoa, that's me. Whew, hey. Hi, I'm going to get started. I'm sure some people are going to trickle in. But first of all, thank you so much for being here on Global Recycling Day. Who knew it was Global Recycling Day? It's actually pretty funny because that's why we chose this day specifically, even though, it's not the biggest holiday in the world. But I'm really grateful you guys are all here on this beautiful evening. My name is Lisa Ballinger, and I'm Executive Director of the Resnick Center for Herbert Bayer Studies. And I'm so happy to invite you here this evening. Andrew will introduce our panelists, but I just want to first thank the Pitkin County Library for this wonderful collaboration, and specifically Mike. Thank you so much for your help, and Genevieve, and also the Bayer Center team who is here, Sarah and Julia. And also I wanted to tell you that Andrew Travers actually came to me probably 7 months ago with this idea and reached out to Gary, and it's just amazing to see it come to fruition, and then to invite Liz as well to this conversation is just a really exciting element to this. You'll hear more about them in a second. I just want to encourage you all to come to visit the Bayer Center. How many of you have visited the Bayer Center? Yes. Oh, wow. It's already converts. Wow. Okay. So our first exhibition or second exhibition is coming down April 26th, the Atlas exhibition, if you haven't been there yet. And then our next exhibition opening in June is focused on typography. So you have to come and visit us again. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Andrew and our panelists. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. Welcome, everybody, and thanks so much for being here. I'm so excited about this conversation. I want to start with just an extra thanks to the Pitkin County Library, just to express the gratitude and pride that we have to be partnering with the library. The broader Aspen Institute mission is to realize a free, just, and equitable society. The Institute does that and tries to drive change through dialogue, leadership, and action. We at the Bayer Center try to do that by harnessing the power of design and art. But the folks here at the library, they're on the front lines of that work, right? Creating community. And these days, some of that work is contested, right? Like we're seeing a record number of book challenges and people trying to limit, the kinds of information that people can access in libraries. So there's no more natural partner that we can imagine for the Aspen Institute, and proud to be here for that. Also, Herbert Bayer was on the board of the Pitkin County Library in the 1950s. Some of you may have read a recent story by Tim Cooney in Aspen Journalism, where he included some of those details, including that Bayer was one of those who pushed to get the library its own building. It had been a bunch of shelves in the Wheeler Opera House. And he got a building on Main Street, the one that preceded this beautiful building. I also wanted to just offer a thanks to our friends at the Aspen Center for Environmental Studies. When I had first sort of come up with this concept, as Lisa was saying, and talked to Gary, found him so engaging and amazing to talk to, and wanted to bring him here to talk about the recycling symbol. I realized, we have to connect that story to today and sustainability and recycling and all that matters about that story. I am someone who is filled with existential dread and panic when I try to throw out a milk carton because I don't know what to do. So I wasn't going to be able to make those connections. I reached out to Christy and said, do you have this magic unicorn of a person who can translate those complicated things to the public and help me connect this story with the public and issues today? Christy said, yes, Liz Chapman. Liz, in the months since then, I've had enlightening conversations with Liz about those issues, relieved some of my panic. I hope she'll do the same for you too. And Liz is a former Aspenite, former outdoor educator for ACES, and was also the waste reduction specialist for the city of Aspen before we lost her to the Front Range to run to be the executive director for Recycle Colorado, which is a statewide nonprofit that does work advancing to better recycling practices, I think, and promoting a circular economy. I would note that Recycle Colorado is a nonprofit organization, so if you like what you hear tonight from Liz, talk to her, slip her a C-note, and learn more about their organization as well. And our guest of honor tonight, Gary Anderson, who requires little introduction, I think. He's the creator of the recycling symbol that we all know. And the story that we'll go through tonight is about him as a 22-year-old architecture student at the University of Southern California, creating that symbol that we all know today. But he went on after that to an award-winning career in planning architecture, working in the U.S. and internationally. I've found my conversations with Gary that he's a brilliant man of enormous generosity, curiosity, and also humility. I think it's probably something we'll talk a bit about, but the recycling symbol wasn't even on his resume throughout his career. It was sort of a footnote thing. But this symbol that Gary created, I think it's fair to say that most inhabitants of Earth would recognize this symbol and understand what it means, and that it would mean the same thing no matter what culture you're in around the world. I think it's quite amazing. I've been trying to think about what icons might be more recognizable, right? We were talking about the nose symbol, right? The circle with the line through it, maybe the smiley face, maybe some corporate symbols like the Nike swoosh, maybe. But very few things have been created by man, few designs that would be recognizable to literally billions of people. I took some notes in recent days, sort of looking at where I saw the recycling symbol. There's 2 in this room, and many more here, and just about everywhere you go, on napkins and cups and whatnot. My 2-year-old son's Paw Patrol garbage truck toy had a recycling symbol on the side. I asked him about it. He knew what it was.
Huh.
My daughter recently, we were reading a book from the children's room here at the library, The Day the Crayons Quit, which I recommend, but on the green crayons page, the green crayon had drawn your symbol. Yeah. So just paying attention for a few days of just like, where am I going to see it? The answer is everywhere. So I guess that's kind of where I wanted to start as sort of a teaser for this conversation, just to ask Gary, how does it feel to have created this thing that have had that kind of penetration in global society?
It's growing on me. I really, you're right, I didn't put it on my resume for other reasons than just humility. My resume was something that I was sending to architectural planning firms, and I was really concerned that if they saw that symbol there, that they would think, oh, well, he's a graphic designer. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for an architect. So I never used it until toward the very end of my career, where I already had enough background to show that, although it never really outweighed that symbol, especially by that time, I felt a little more confident in using it. But I guess that's kind of an answer to your question. I feel very privileged to have been the person that came up with that symbol. I think that the time was right. It was when there wasn't any competition other than this formal one that I entered. There weren't other companies trying to develop a recycling symbol. That was the one symbol for a long time. You see other variations now. And so it really had a chance to get a foothold. But I'm very, people go to great lengths. I've explained this several times, I think. People today especially go to great lengths to not use the word proud. In fact, they'll say, I'm humbled. Well, I would like to think that I have some humility, but I'm pretty proud of having designed that service. So.
Liz, in your work for Circle Colorado and educating the public about these issues, you often use Gary's story as a way to do that, connect the people. Why is his story useful? How is it helpful?
Well, one of the reasons it's so useful is the symbol is so ubiquitous, and another reason is it's in the public domain. And there are very few things in this day and age that are released where you don't get any money. Everyone's using this symbol all over the world, but he doesn't get any remuneration for that. And it is an example of putting something so useful out there for the rest of humanity to use that gives me hope in humanity. And its ubiquity on products that I use as a talking point to explain to people these corporations also want to share that hope and try and shift people from being so cynical about what the corporate world is doing. Lots of reasons to be cynical, but there are also reasons to be hopeful. And one of those reasons is the way they utilize this ubiquitous symbol and have decided to not compete with it so that it can continue to communicate to people what it is intending to communicate. If it were drowned out in the noise and there were a bunch of different symbols in every country of what to recycle, recycling would be a lot harder. The fact that everyone has decided to join together in the use of this symbol makes it more possible, and that is made possible because it is not a proprietary thing that Gary has gifted to the rest of us.
Yeah, well said. Tonight, our goal is going to be to tell the story of the symbol's creation, its roots here in Aspen. I think Gary will inspire us to be creative. I think Liz will inspire us to take some good action, and I honestly hope that this becomes a story that Aspen tells about itself, its design history. Part of the Aspen lore. There's so many stories that we tell about what defines us in Aspen and how we're different. Like I hope that this can grow and become one of them. It's a very little known story. I hope we can start changing that. I'm going to give some of the backgrounds to get us to 1970 and the creation of the symbol here in Aspen, and then I'm going to walk sort of Gary through the creation of the symbol, and then Liz and Gary and I are going to have a conversation, I hope, about the symbol in action, and bring us up to today. And then we'll take your questions, so keep those in mind. Why did this happen in Aspen, right? Like most things and most developments in modern Aspen, we can trace it back to Walter Pepke. Pepke, of course, was the president of the Container Corporation of America, who came here to Aspen with his wife Elizabeth Pepke in the 1940s, with the idea of creating, sort of utopia around the idea of fostering the mind, body, and spirit here in the mountains, around developing the ski resort, around bringing people together around great ideas and great books and what would become the Aspen Institute, around music and what would become the Aspen Music Festival and School, around art and design and what would become the International Design Conference. Pepke had been working to raise the Container Corporation's national and international standing, in part through advertising and really progressive and interesting ideas about advertising, right? Using Herbert Bayer, the artist, to design ads. Bayer and Pepke, through Container Corporation, launched what we would think of today as a corporate responsibility mission, sort of corporate sustainability mission. The idea of sort of doing things that weren't directly to promote your company, right, outside of your company for the betterment of society, in theory, right? So they did, advertisements like the Great Ideas of Western Man series that combined, modern artists like Bayer with quotes and ideas from, Emerson, Plato, Shakespeare, Lincoln, not advertising a product, but just spreading an idea. During World War II, they used that same mechanism to promote the war effort, for people to conserve things like eggs and gas, and to promote recycling of paper. By the mid-40s, the Container Corporation claimed that their corrugated boxes, which was their main business, were made from 90% recycled paper. And sort of as all this was getting started in Aspen, one of the things that Bayer and Pepke did together was the World Geographic Atlas, which is currently the subject of 3 related exhibitions on the Aspen Institute campus. Lissa and I had the pleasure of walking Gary through the Bayer Center exhibition today, which was great. So the Atlas, in addition to being this radically ambitious effort to understand our physical world and our civilization, sort of lays out in its final chapter, called Conservation of Resources, all these concerns that sound a lot like the sustainability concerns we have today about how to equitably distribute food and water, about deforestation, these kinds of things, about waste, right? And Pepke, in his introduction to the Atlas, wrote, and this sort of sums up, sort of what they were up to back then. We in the Container Corporation believe that a company may occasionally step outside of its recognized field of operations in an effort to contribute modestly to the realms of education and good taste. These ideas you can sort of see coming together there of visual communication through these ads, through the Atlas, also these sustainability and environmental ideas coming together. You can see how we're sort of on the road to a recycling symbol being born out of those efforts, right? So the Atlas, when it debuted, was at the International Design Conference in Aspen in 1953. So the design conference isn't around anymore, so folks might not know, but there was a time after it was founded in 1951, and for decades, it's the premier gathering of designers, artists, architects, Pepke had died in 1960, but sort of all these balls he got rolling continued, right? So that comes to the late 1960s and sort of the environmental movement that in many ways their work sort of preceded, and the youth movement of that period. The Container Corporation, as well as the International Design Conference, want to bring that into the fold, right? They had the idea of a contest to create a symbol promoting recycling. The idea was to promote recycling of paper products that you could place on products that would say it had been made from recycled paper or that it could be recycled itself. And they put out this call to college and high school students around the country. The way that the president at the time in 1970, H.G. Vanderherb, put it was, we could have designed this symbol ourselves, but we felt that the younger generation, as inheritors of the earth, should have their say. So very overtly saying, this youth movement, the people in Aspen from the Freak Power movement, and the weird hippies running around doing this stuff, like us buttoned-up guys at the Container Corporation and at the design conference, like we want to see what they have to say. The strictures for the symbol was that it would be black and white, that could be reduced to 2 inches, so it could be placed on products.
Quarter inch.
Quarter inch, that's right, quarter inch. So it could be placed on products. And the winner would be picked at the 1970 International Design Conference by a panel of judges that included Herbert Bayer himself, the designer Saul Bass, is best known for his work on movie posters and movie title sequences. He worked with Alfred Hitchcock on Vertigo and Psycho. Much later, he worked with Martin Scorsese on Goodfellas and one of the great title sequences. Also, Elliot Noyes. Noyes was the design director at IBM and created the IBM Selectric typewriter and was also the chair of the International Design Conference at the time. So that's just an example of the eight-member panel of judges. So there's no bigger names in design. That's the Container Corporation and the International Design Conference's way of saying this is important, right? The winner would get $2,500 as a tuition stipend to be spent on education, also a trip to the International Design Conference at Aspen. The symbol would be placed in the public domain and given to paper and packaging industry to label products. So they got more than 500 submissions, and when that panel of judges got together at the design conference, they selected Gary Anderson's Chasing Arrows symbol that we all recognize today. So that preamble brings us to the campus of the University of Southern California in the spring of 1970. The first Earth Day is coming up. Gary, so you're a college student on that campus. You see a poster advertising this contest. Why did you want to enter, and how did you start thinking about it?
Well, there was a lot of background that went into it before I even decided to enter the competition. As you mentioned, environmentalism was something that was, it was certainly not new, but it was becoming, there was a greater and greater awareness of ecology, the environment, sustainability. And as a young person, these ideas really took hold, excuse me, and they felt like something that was just part of me and my generation. So you've seen up on the screen, probably it's cycled through a few times now, but Rachel Carson had written The Silent Spring, and that was something that was on everybody's mind, and certainly it was on mine. I had not read it, but I knew about it. So there was just, the whole environmental movement was there. When I saw the opportunity to enter a competition to design a symbol, that prompted me in one way. I was really more interested in just the possibility of kind of proving myself in terms of design and graphics. But I thought, well, it's certainly for a good cause. That's something that I could support, so why not? It was also something that I felt I could do on my own. I wouldn't need a lot of resources. I wouldn't need a team. I wouldn't need permission. So those were the kinds of things I think that prompted me also to engage in that competition and submit an entry.
And so what was your creative process? What did you do from there?
Well, again, it also, I drew from what I already knew. We had a big group project that we were working on in school. Again, this was a school of architecture. We were kind of the weird nerds in that school, and we were working on a project that had to do with physical development, urban design, and to explain some of the processes, the natural and the artificial processes that go on in how things develop, how things get built up in communities. I drew some explanatory graphics, and in coming up with how to present those ideas, I had been working with arrows and bending arrows and so forth. I think you also have seen some of those up on the screen. There was that. There was also a field trip that I took when I was about a fifth grader to a printing press with all the other kids in my class. And it was just, for some reason, I was just fascinated by these broad bands of paper that went over and under and through rollers into the printing presses and being fed into different locations within this huge space. And so the idea of paper going over rollers was part of where I drew my inspiration. Another was probably about that same time, maybe I was even younger, I had come across a poem that has also been up here in a little book of scientific poems for children. And it was about the Mobius strip. And I didn't know what the Mobius strip was, but it led me to find out what it was. And that was something that because it kind of expressed, in my mind, a kind of not only continuity, but also a never-ending, a kind of morphing, but never-ending cycle of events. So somehow in my mind I made that connection. So specifically those were probably the most important things that I was thinking about when I started to come up with my idea.
Mm-hmm. And you've said you spent a day or two?
Yeah, it doesn't seem like much, does it? I did. Because of some of these drawings that I had been doing already, I knew kind of the proportions of everything that looked good to me. The width of the arrows relative to the size of the arrowhead, the dimensions of the arrowhead, the radius of the circles. Those are all things that I had been experimenting with for these other graphics for school. And so I relied pretty heavily on those things that I'd already been experimenting with graphically.
And there was more than one design that you submitted, right?
Yes, and there was a slide that flew through a while ago about information theory. So this was a very current. Information theory was very big when I was nearing the end of my undergraduate career, and that was kind of the process that I went through, understanding the concept of noise, not just in terms of audio sound, but in terms of other kind of messaging, whether that's writing, whether that's graphics, how best to get a message across. And one way to help is to eliminate noise. In the case of graphics, you could think of noise as like screening or color sometimes, or any curly cues that are just kind of decorative. And so the first symbol that I came up with, the very first, you've also seen up here, had a different shading of the arrows as they go around, kind of indicating the kind of repurification at one point of this product, or this, in this case, paper. The competition was for paper products. And I also had the word recycle in it. And knowing this about, and having it drilled into me actually, about information theory and the importance of eliminating noise if you're going to get a message across, I took it upon myself to see what kind of noise I could eliminate. And it was the shading, it was the word recycle, which also would have been tiny if the whole thing was reduced to 1/4 of an inch. So the three that I submitted were that first one with a lot of noise in it, and another one which was the one that you see now, really, and a kind of intermediate one. I wanted to cover all bases, so I'd be sure to please somebody and so I had the three different alternatives that I submitted.
Yeah. What was your reaction when you heard you won?
It was very interesting. And I like to talk about, you've heard me say this before, the arrogance of youth. I was young, I was naive, I'd never had any real failures in school, or, there were certainly things in my life before then that were not great successes, but in terms of this kind of thing, I'd never really had any failures, and I was pleased with what I had submitted, and it was, I really had no clue about how good it was or how good it would be relative to the other submittals, but I thought, well, I'm pleased with it. So when I got the word, I wasn't too surprised. I just thought, well, they think the same way I do, I guess. So, of course, now, if something like that happened to me, if I had an equivalent kind of success in any other point in my career, I'd just be thrilled. I'd be beside myself. But not then. I was happy. I was especially pleased that there was some money involved with it, and they were going to be paying me some money. But I was not ecstatic.
Yeah, and then when you made your trip to Aspen, I know it's a long time ago now, but memories from that design conference. What was the experience like? What stuck with you?
Well, of course, it was in the summertime, so it was a very different place. Mm-hmm. And I was enchanted by the town itself, which was somewhat different. It was a lot homier, I would say, than it is now. Not that it's not beautiful now also, but it was just a different kind of place. The conference was just overwhelming to think of all of these great designers coming together in one place, and the conversation was so stimulating. That kind of put me in my place, because I mean, I really had nothing to say to these people who knew so much more about graphics, really, than I did, and design and everything else. So maybe I could say I was humbled then. But it was a fascinating thing. There was a certain contingency of people my age who were activists, and well, they probably thought of themselves as radicals, but they questioned, why would graphic artists be contributing to big corporations who are making a lot of money off from them, who are making a lot of money off other people, who are enjoying the profits of other people's work. There was that contingency, and I couldn't say that I completely disagreed with them, but they were very vociferous sometimes. And I specifically remember one woman a young woman who had Birkenstocks and the whole thing, and was sitting there knitting through the whole thing, but it didn't stop her from talking. She had something to say about everything while she was knitting. And for some reason, I don't know why, but I can't remember too many of the arguments, but it was just this image of this young lady knitting that was just so contrarian compared to everything else that was going on at the conference.
Yeah. And then the way that you've described it from there is that you and the symbol went your separate ways for a while. Gary goes on to begin his career and sort of leaves the symbol behind. The symbol goes off on its trajectory, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Liz, help us, what happens as we move into the late 70s, the 80s, recycling starts growing. What happens with recycling, and what role does the symbol play in it?
So as we move out of the 70s into the 80s and recycling became more popular and more practical, this public domain symbol was an easy way for other product manufacturers to communicate, well, ours can be recycled as well. It's not just cardboard. It was originally invented for cardboard, and honestly, what they were trying to do with the Container Corporation is they had variations on a theme, and they had hoped that they could communicate to their consumers, this product is made from recycled paper. And then they had a slightly different symbol that said this product can be recycled. And then this is a product that is both recyclable and recycled. And to your point about reducing noise, that quickly got narrowed down to the single symbol we see today, because that nuance is too much nuance, too much noise. And you still see it used in the paper industry. Most people do not realize that whether it's a black circle with white arrows or a white circle with black arrows, that actually has a difference in meaning. You just look at it and go, oh, recycling. I put this in the recycling, or this has been recycled. So that ubiquity spread out to like aluminum cans and to other paper products. And as recycling in the 80s started to gain momentum and the environmentalist movement started to become part of our cultural lexicon, there became an awareness within the public that there were products that were not easily recycled. And that led us to the vilification of the plastics industry. And the plastics industry was like, but that's not fair. Some of our stuff can be recycled. It's not all unrecyclable. So they took that symbol and modified it to communicate with the folks that handle the waste at the end of the stream, so that they could say, oh, well, this plastic thing actually does have a second life, and this plastic thing does not. And that became the resin code, and that has flashed behind us. And that has led to an unintended consequence that people now think that if you see those chasing arrows on any object, you think it can be recycled. And if you see something similar to those chasing arrows on any symbol, you think it can be recycled. And unfortunately, that has led to problems in the recycling industry born out of people's desire to get everything that can be recycled into the recycle bin. Because if it doesn't belong in the recycle bin, that creates economic and logistical problems. So it has helped it has simultaneously propelled recycling forward and created problems within the system.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you to just sort of maybe explain a little bit more the difference between Gary's symbol and the resin symbol, and why that matters.
So what happened is the resin symbol, which I frequently will bring a product in front of someone when I'm having this conversation, and I will say, show me the recycling symbol. And they will always point to the chasing arrows with the number in the middle. And I will retort, that's not the recycling symbol. The recycling symbol is the one that we've been seeing flashing behind us with the fat arrows, no number in the middle, and they fold on themselves. What is similar but legally distinct is the chasing arrows that are a single line folded in half with a number in the middle. And that is what the Society of Plastic Industry created in 1988 to communicate with the waste handling community. This is a plastic that can be recycled because it's a number 1. This is a number 2 that cannot be recycled. We as consumers missed out on that nuance. Back to what I said before, where the Container Corporation tried to create, this means it's recycled, this means it's recyclable, and all of us just went to, it's recycling. Same thing with that resin code. It's so similar to the recycling symbol that people conflate the two, and they assume, there we go, if you look closely, they are not the same. Those are different symbols. But in our everyday life, they're similar enough that we've equated them as being equivalent when they are not. And that has created problems because now I have frequently had people say to me, when I was with the city of Aspen, there was a playground set that had been dumped at the Rio Grande Recycle Center. And when I tracked down the folks that had done that, their defense to me was, well, it's got that arrow stamped in the bottom. I thought I could recycle it. Okay. We got to have a talk. No, that's not how that works.
So, how big picture, right? If we're talking about resin symbol 1988 and the effect that it has, like to today, how has this iconography and these symbols, how has it affected recycling rates and the ability to get things recycled that we want to be? What do you think sort of the big impact has been?
So. Again, I would say it is creating two different things. So it is creating a way to communicate with people about recycling. How many of the people in this room, when you go to get rid of something that you think can be recycled, do you look for that symbol on the container to put it in, right? All of us know that if you have a blue bin with those chasing arrows, I can put this in there. So it has advanced recycling, and it has made it super recognizable. As you were telling the story with your kids, it's made it possible to communicate to the younger generations where these things go in a way that reduces noise, so you don't have to read. It transcends language. It doesn't matter what language you're speaking, you see that symbol and you know that that means this material is going to get turned into another material. However, because it's in the public domain, there's no regulatory authority about who gets to put it where. And so it often gets put on things that do not belong in the recycling bin, plastic or otherwise. And there's no regulatory authority by any government entity to say you can or cannot use that because it's a freely available symbol. So it has both created problems and advanced recycling. I think taken in whole, I would put my hypothesis out there that it has done more help to recycle things across the world than it has done harm, but it has been a mixed bag.
Yeah. I guess on that front, the Federal Trade Commission does have its green guides, right? That advises on what environmental messaging can be put on products. They're currently reviewing how the recycling symbol, the resin symbol, can and should be used. So I'd love to hear from both of you, sort of what you think the government can or should do to change, regulate better, communicate better, use the symbol more responsibly.
Oh, me? Ladies first.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
So the green guides are non-binding. They are guidelines. They are written in such a way, if you read carefully, it says things like producers may, producers should. This could be misleading, this could be genuine. And because of that vagueness in the legal language, those green guides are still not getting to a place where there are legal prohibitions against misusing the symbol. However, they are establishing some language that if you wanted to bring legal remedy to a producer, they are now providing some substance to say, if less than 60% of the market where you deliver this product to cannot recycle, if it's 40% or less, and you use this symbol, that's deceptive. And they're not going to take any action on that. It will take, I imagine, some sort of civil suit, but they are now establishing at a legal national level that there's precedent for saying, you are using this to mislead people rather than to educate people. And so in that sense, I think it's a very useful tool for, a very useful role for the government to play.
Well, as a designer, I like to think of what kind of positive things we could improve to make it more useful. And I'm seeing some real progress in that way, I think. It's just that different groups are progressing in different ways. We were talking before about, you're starting to see now this rectangle with the recycling symbol in it. And sometimes the recycling symbol will have the bar through it that's indicating that it can't be. But there are also a few words. The symbol can only do so much on its own. I think it can shout out recycle or recycling, but it doesn't tell you anything beyond that, really. But these new little designs that you're seeing, I think, are helpful. I personally would like to see maybe just go back to the idea of the symbol just representing recycling, not recycled or recyclable, but just recycling, and that could be something on packaging, that symbol could be something on packaging that would bring the consumer's eye to more detailed information about that specific package, that specific container, because there's so many different ways, so many different requirements for different types of packaging. I don't care how good of a graphic designer you are, you can't get one symbol to explain all that. You can't get one flag to describe everything about the United States or Great Britain. You know that flag, you know what it stands for, but it doesn't tell you anything really about the company or a religious symbol. It can't tell you about all the sects in Christianity or Judaism or Islam or anything else. All it can tell you is that, this has to do with this religion. And so I would just like to say, I would like to see, go ahead, put more information, put more detailed information down, but this symbol can be used to say, here, it's on this spot on the packaging where you'll get that information.
And we're gonna move to audience questions in a minute. But I did want to ask Gary, for most of your career, you weren't known as the recycling symbol guy, right? That changed in 1999. A recycling specialist from Morris County, New Jersey, took the initiative to find out who it was. Her name was Penny Jones. I've tried to find her. I found sort of an incredible story about when she retired, about sort of all the great work that she did.
Huge celebration. Not that she was retiring, but just people wanted to show their gratitude for how much she had contributed. She had made it her mission. She was going to find out who designed that symbol because it wasn't common knowledge, and she actually had some of her staff working on it also. And I had been out of the country for 7 years, and that was another reason why I was just kind of removed from the scene. And but she tracked me down. I think I didn't realize this, but I think there was also an item in Who's Who in America, And that's how she found me. I didn't even realize it was there. And nobody uses Who's Who anymore because you can Google it.
And I mean, how has your life changed since then? That you've become the public face, publicly known. The recycling symbol is in the collect. We were talking about it earlier today, in the collection at the Museum of Modern Art.
Yeah.
You know, it's how has your life changed since then?
Not dramatically. I just, I do get more, I get invited to things like this, which is remarkable. And I stutter and stammer anyway, but I used to do it even more if I had to talk about all this stuff. Now it's fun. I mean, I enjoy describing, you know, the process, the influences and so forth, and it's easy because who knows more about it than me? And so, no, I love being able to talk to people and explain. I wish I could tell people more about the technology behind recycling, but I'm no authority in that area. So anyway, these are the kinds of things that have represented a change in my life, I think.
Yeah. And just anticipating the audience question, I'm going to go ahead and ask it to Liz. How are we doing here in the place from which the recycling symbol emerged? Aspen and Pickens County, I know you were at the landfill today. You were out inspecting the scene, checking it out. How do we do here in terms of, you know, recycling rates and, you know, policy action?
So Aspen is very on the forefront in Colorado. We're doing very well. I believe the rate, and I'm looking to see, is 36%. Is that right? 30. I don't remember. Okay. It's in the high 30s. It's above the national average, and it's double the state rate. So the state rate for recycling in Colorado is 16%, and Aspen is far above that in the mid-30s. Pickens County has a rate of 48%, which is even higher than the city. Pickens County also has the advantage of they are more dispersed in terms of they don't have as concentrated a tourist population that contributes to the stuff that's getting thrown away. And as hard as the folks at the city of Aspen work to educate our visiting population, it is hard to catch people's attention when they're on vacation. And so there are many lost opportunities there that just aren't true when you're talking about year-round residents that you see in unincorporated Pickens County. So from that perspective, Aspen is doing very well. Just this past year, it hasn't even been a full year, Aspen took another step. So Aspen set precedent years ago by the city council set a waste ordinance that required trash haulers that service businesses and residents here in Aspen to also provide recycling. They were one of the first cities to make that a rule. It is now a very common rule in other Colorado cities, and that is slowly bringing the rate up. What they did last year in 2023 is they passed another ordinance that says if you have food waste from a retail food service, you have to also keep that out of the landfill and put it into what I would call organics recycling. So different than the recycling that we've been talking about that is more focused on materials, but focusing on food recycling. And again, that has put Aspen in the forefront of the rest of the state, looking to Aspen as a leader for how you get less material buried in the landfill.
Let's hear from you all. Are there audience questions? Do we have a mic? Sure, right up here, third row.
I can ask, I'm pretty loud.
Yeah, I can hear you.
These projections here, are they what influenced you? Well, I know it's part of the Herbert Bayer, but are these all the things that influenced you in your?
Yeah, this
Okay.
section, yeah. We actually got this. We discussed how it might be used. It was a little presentation I made for a very small lunch and learn at an architect's office for his staff. He invited me to talk to them, and I put this show together, and that's what it is. It's images of things that influenced me.
Other questions? Yeah. I'm going to wait for the mic. We are recording, so we want to, yeah. people don't know, this is the great Katie Viola, local designer, and yeah.
When you were involved in the competition, were you able to see other students or other competitors' work?
No, and I didn't make any attempt to find out. I don't know that I would have been able to. I don't know how. Usually design competitions are not open to the public. It depends. Different ones, you probably know. Some are, some aren't. I don't recall that this was. But usually the designs of the finalists or the top tier are usually made public. And I don't remember that they were for the other two. There was a first place, second place, and either a third place or honorable mention, something like that. And I know that they each came from a different part of the country. One from the West Coast, that was me. One from New Jersey, and one from Chicago, I think. So it was a good distribution nationally. But I think I heard the New Jersey guy's name once, but I haven't remembered it. I would like to see now.
I'll just say I looked, and in the Container Corporation announcements, they do list the names and the origins of the
yeah.
finalists, and I think it's like 10 awards of like merit, but they didn't release the designs. So we hope at some point we'll find them in some archive somewhere, because it'd be so interesting to see like what would have number 2 been, what could it have been, like would it have had the impact that the recycling symbol had? It's hard to imagine that it would, but it'd be interesting to see sort of what else was on offer. Yeah.
I wonder if you could reflect on your pedagogy in architecture school, because it was about 20 years on from the influence of some of the Bauhaus folks in the U.S.
Right.
And I'm aware, like in Northern California, it was a slightly different take on kind of regional pride of some of the study. But when you thought about different architecture schools, certainly in Chicago and other places, you really saw. Did you know who Herbert Bayer was? And
No. And coming to the point of selecting a school to go to, even, I mean, I was very naive. I grew up, I went to high school in Las Vegas. Los Angeles was the closest place. I had a friend that was going to USC. Those were the kinds of things I made my decision on. And it's probably a lot different nowadays because it's so competitive, and kids have a lot more parental help and direction, I think, than they did back then as to where they should go to school. So I don't know if the same thing would happen if I were 20 years old today. In terms of the approach of different design schools, yes, it was very different, and USC was really very different from a lot of the others. We used to make jokes about how we were being taught. We would say, oh, well, we could talk a good building. The emphasis wasn't really on what we, again, kind of disparagingly called design, D with a capital D. It had more input from other academic pursuits, I guess. In hospital design now, they talk a lot about evidence-based design in the last 10 years or so, meaning that you don't just arbitrarily put a line someplace. There has to be a reason, or put a space someplace. There has to be a reason why the space is there, why it's as big as it is, how it relates to other spaces, what colors you use, evidence-based design. And the reason being that there has been research about how these different things can affect the users of those spaces and that architecture. We were, I'd like to say, USC was really ahead of the game in that area, but with the result that it was hard for us to pass the design test on the Architectural Registration Board because we didn't, we didn't have the architectural graphic skills that some of the other students had that came from Harvard and Yale, of course, were they were top of the pile. San Francisco, also Berkeley. And we had the crosstown rival UCLA, and they were also more design oriented. IIT. The design that we had was influenced by the Bauhaus, but it was all Miesian, Mies van der Rohe type design.
Gary?
Yes, hi.
Love it. So I'm curious how the mandala affected the design, as well as the psychedelic poster that been coming up over and over to affect the design. And then for Liz, I'm really curious how, when I go to recycle, I sometimes have these existential feelings, as you did. That what really gets recycled, does it get, when it's all mixed together? And sometimes I just question, are they really going to recycle
Yeah,
us?
exactly. Feel the same way. Try to make this brief. The mandala, I just happened to have been reading a little bit about Carl Jung, the psychologist, and he talked about the fact that there seemed to be certain cultural, what would be the word, symbols, icons, that are universal, that cut across all icons, and one of those was the mandala. And of course, this was the hippie period. Every self-respecting hippie had a mandala of some sort or another hanging on his wall or her wall. And so that was just kind of in my mind. And the thing about it that's pretty obvious, I think, if you look at a good mandala, is that it relates so many disparate things, and it's meant to symbolize the entire universe somehow in just one circular thing. And so that was, I think, one of the reasons that I wanted to go to something that was more or less circular in shape. That's where that came from. And the other thing was the mandala, the other...
The psychedelic...
The psychedelic posters. Yeah, I could say quite a bit about this. Of course, that was every rock concert that was staged in San Francisco had a post, and in other places too, had a poster usually associated with it, just to get the word out. No social media, no streaming, nothing. And it was a lot cheaper than buying ads on TV, which would have been poo-pooed anyway because it was, the man. So these posters became very prevalent and prominent. And of course, I liked them too. I liked the fluidity. I liked the special lettering that they fit into the forms, which really made you it drew your attention to the information. It wasn't just a bland, vanilla kind of typeface. So I appreciated all that. And that was all going on. But what had happened just recently, just before I started to design, or before I saw the poster for the design, were two events that kind of turned me off to all that. One was the Charles Manson murders, which obviously was the result of taking psychoactive drugs, or at least that was a major part of it. And also the shoot up in the Marin County Courthouse where Angela Davis, senior moment. her supporters, went in and shot up a courtroom. And it had those two events had a huge impact on me. So although there were certain things I could really appreciate about psychedelic art, I didn't want that was not. I didn't approve of those things that were happening, and I didn't want the symbol to reflect psychedelic art. So I liked the curvilinearity, the fluidity I mentioned before. I liked all of that, but I wanted to be different from that, and so that's why it's a very regularized shape. It's not just kind of random. You can tell that it's based on an equilateral triangle with arcs and straight lines, and so in that regard, it's very different from psychedelic art. But on the other hand, the kind of I don't know why I can't think of a better word than fluidity, but that I meant for that to be present in the symbol also. I'm sorry I took up all your time.
I know we're a little over time, but I want to quickly answer.
Yeah,
So-
maybe I can just piggyback on Mark's question, just to say maybe also along with that, just give us some ways to translate this conversation into action,
Okay.
right? When I'm standing in front of the recycling bin and having my existential crisis, like what can I do? What action can I take that would, better serve, the circular economy? And also, if there are any other big picture things that we should be doing.
So from a big picture, I'll go from there down to the granular. The biggest thing you can do to help facilitate better recycling in the circular economy is before you make a purchase, before you grab that item off the shelf, have a moment and go, well, what am I going to do with this when I'm done? Is there a good path for this container or this item to have a second life when I'm done with it, is the first thing. That is the biggest thing you can do as a consumer, is have that conscious consumption as you start to make those purchasing decisions. Choose the thing that you can recycle where you live over the thing that you cannot. In terms of how can you get rid of some of the existential dread of going up to the container, every community in the Roaring Fork Valley publishes recycling guides, and if you can take a moment and genuinely look, does this object appear on this guide? If it does not, do not recycle it. Throw it away. If it does, put it in the recycling. Follow those rules. Take a moment to educate yourself. Reach out, whether you live in the city of Aspen, Snowmass Village, Pickens County, or further down the valley. All of those communities work hard and want to share information with all of us about how to recycle well. And to the other point of your question, how do you have confidence in the recycling system? One of the ways I would demonstrate that you can have confidence, 2 different multinational corporations are spending $50 million apiece to build new recycling facilities in Denver. They would not be investing that kind of money if they didn't actually make money off of recycling. So I think that is the shortest way to answer your question. Yeah, reuse, reduce what you consume, reuse what you buy, and then at the end recycle it. Absolutely. Recycle is the last thing in that.
Just today I've been searching on the internet can I recycle or parts of any kind of metal products.
So the question is, where can you recycle metal products?
The closest was in Silt. So it's pretty far away from here. Yeah, and so I live here and in Chicago. And in Chicago we have ways to get rid of our many kinds of different metal things.
Are you talking about something like if this table were made out of metal?
Yeah, or a frying pan or a pot. Or this.
There is a bin at the Rio Grande Recycle Center that's labeled metals. It's bright red, and it has metals on the side, and you can put those things there, and they will get them
recycled. That
recycled.
on the internet.
I do believe that if you go to the city of Aspen and you type in the search bar recycling, it will bring you to a page and it will list all of the things that you can recycle at the Rio Grande Recycle Center, which, by the way, right now, short time, you can take your skis and your snowboards down there and they can be recycled. Now that's not going to last forever. That's only going to be a ski season thing, but they are doing a temporary program where you can get your skis and snowboards recycled down there, as well as metal objects.
News you can use. I want to say thank you, Liz. Thank you, Gary. This has been fun. It's been an honor. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Thank you.